identification, the fundamentally important thing about characters is that you have to be able to identify with them. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be likable, but good storytelling requires a degree of audience, reader identification with the character. Otherwise, it's not a story, otherwise, frankly. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens. Storytelling is about creating an emotional effect in the mind of the reader. I think emotion is more important than intellect when it comes to storytelling. Obviously, you want to try and be a smart storyteller, but you're not trying to make people think. You're trying to make people feel. And I think that if you don't identify with the character, then that's not going to happen. I think that it kind of gets to a fundamental point about what story is. It seems to me interesting that religion is basically a way of teaching people how to behave. Okay, it always has been in all different human societies. But instead of these rules to live by being just lists of rules like the Ten Commandments, they're always put into the form of fiction. They're stories. Why is that? Why don't they just tell us religions and why don't they just tell us how to behave? Why is it always put in the form of story? I think it's because I've got my little pet theory is that you cannot just tell people things. We learn. Any teacher will tell you that people generally learn by doing things better than they learn by simply being told something. If you're simply told something, you forget half of what you've been told. It doesn't really sink in. But you learn by doing. Once you've actually done it yourself, it sinks in. Now, story mimics experience. This is why I say it comes back to the emotional identification thing. When you are involved in a story, deeply involved, engrossed in it, you forget yourself because you're identifying with the character. Okay, and so when he feels terrified, you feel terrified. When they feel, excited, you feel excited. This is where it comes. Coming back, taking the long way around. This is why I'm coming back to your question about character. That's why it's fundamentally important that you make the reader identify with the character, because when you feel, it mimics experience. It will make you feel like it's happening to you, and then that's how you learn from it. I think this is why story exists. It's a vehicle for mimicking experience. How do you make the reader identify with the character? Ideally, make them likable. Make them good at what they do. Make them likable. Make us feel sympathy for them. Like the sort of three, sort of quick and easy ways of doing this. But if your character is completely unlikable in every respect, and there's nothing about him that you can identify with, then it's going to be very difficult for the readership to identify with him. To be honest, I find this with most superhero comics. I'm not really a big superhero fan, but it pays my mortgage. But most of the stuff I read, most of the superhero comics I read, I have to read for homework, basically, for research, for what I do. And I find it very difficult to identify with lots of these characters because there's nothing there I can identify with. They just don't seem real, like real people to me. There's a set of genre assumptions for what's supposed to go on in a superhero comic, which the reader, the fans naturally assume that's what they want in a superhero comic. But for me, as kind of somebody who comes to it from outside superheroes, I often find it quite difficult to identify with this stuff. Alfred Hitchcock, somebody asked him once, what's more important, story or plot or character? The way he approached it, he said that first of all, he decides what a character is going to do, and then he will give them such attributes as would make it reasonable that they would do that. So for him, it's very much, the plot comes first, and then he chooses the characters to fit that plot. But a different writer might say, well, okay, I want to create this very fully rounded character, and then we'll kind of release them into the wild and see where they take me, which is equally valid.
Kind of like what Shakespeare does, really, sort of character driving the plot in his big works, anyway.
Well, he's the master, isn't it? I guess the equation is plot plus character equals story. I think character on its own is just portraiture. That's not storytelling. You can create a very, very fully rounded portrait of a character, but if they don't actually do anything, you're not telling a story. At the same time, plot without character, it's just this happens and this happens and that happens and this happens and that happens, and you end up with just hollow action. And it's not about anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add up to anything. It is, in the immortal words of Homer Simpson, just a bunch of stuff that happens. But the magic trick, which is easier said than done, is to make the plot and character define each other. They're fundamentally the same thing. Like what the character does is defined by who he is, and but what he then chooses to do will affect what happens next. And so the plot and character are fundamentally intertwined. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but that's the thing to aspire to. That's the thing to aim for. And the best stories are the ones where it's character revealed through action, and action driving character. Again, this comes back to the showing, not telling thing. Character isn't what's going on in your head. Character isn't what you say. Character is what you do. And that's why we put character through the ringer, because what a character, your true inner character, is only revealed by the choices made in extremis, in extreme situations. Because what a character might say, I'm this kind of guy. If so and so happened, I would be like this. I would be brave. And then when the shit goes down, that character isn't brave. It turns out that they're not who they said they were. And your job is to show that. Your job is to show that. Put them into situations which will reveal their inner nature through the choices they make in extremis. And that doesn't mean, it has to be Die Hard. I'm not saying, does that mean they'd be willing to jump off the roof of that building? It can be, overcoming crippling shyness. I guess that comes to the fundamental question of storytelling is, and I'm talking obviously in very broad terms, but I'm talking about mainstream storytelling, okay? And I realise most of you want to do your own indie type stuff, and that's brilliant. I'm talking about basically commercial writing for pay, okay? That said, obviously you guys can do absolutely anything you want, okay? There is no right and wrong. If you don't want to tell the kind of stories I'm talking about here, then that's fine. I'm absolutely encouraging you to go and find your own voice and do your own thing. But obviously I'm just talking to a broad audience here, and I'm talking about mainstream writing, okay? In mainstream writing, mainstream storytelling, basically you want to have a character who wants something, okay? That's what a story is. A story is, character wants this thing, and something's stopping him. Something gets in the way. He overcomes obstacles, by the end of which he either gets what he wants, or he fails to get what he wants. But even if he fails, there is still some sense of closure. Okay, it can't just be like, oh, well, he could try again next week, because then it's not a story, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. Whether he succeeds or fails, it kind of rounds off at the end. And obviously that's a very, very broad thing I'm talking about there, but the character wants something. It could be the character, Bruce Willis wants to get out, save his wife and get out of this building alive. Or it could be, I want to overcome my stifling shyness, which is, or my debilitating stutter, or something like that. But it's a specific thing. It can't just be, oh, I want to feel better about myself as a person. Even if that's the subtext of your story, you need to come up with a specific, concrete goal for that character. And the concrete goal can represent something abstract. A good way to do it is if you can start by thinking of what is the theme of your story in a general sense. And once you know what the theme is, like for example, I want to find love. Love is a very nebulous general thing. If the character wants to find love, then you need to have a specific love interest in that story. And it might end up being a completely different character from the one that the character expected to fall in love with. But it needs to be, I need to get that girl to go out with me, rather than a general, I want to find love. You need to use concrete examples to specify your goals. And there needs to be conflict. There's no drama without conflict. Again, I'm not talking about exploding helicopters necessarily, although there's plenty of those in my work. You need obstacles to overcome, and it's the overcoming of the obstacles. That's what a story is. A story is the overcoming of obstacles in pursuit of a goal.